Welcome to True Crime Threads, where chilling tales unfold. Today, a small town's darkest secret is about to be revealed. In a peaceful town where everyone knew everyone else, the unthinkable was about to happen. The Stevens family appeared to be like any other, living a quiet life on the outskirts of town. Jonathan Stevens, a well-respected man in his 40s, had remarried a few years earlier to Marissa, a kind-hearted woman with a teenage daughter named Emily. They blended into their small community without drawing much attention. Neighbors often saw Jonathan working in his garden, Marissa volunteering at the local school, and Emily attending high school, where she was known for her shy but friendly nature. On the surface, they were a perfect family and ordinary suburban household. But beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect life, a forbidden relationship began to grow, one that no one could have predicted. Jonathan and Emily's bond, which started innocently enough, began to change over time. At first, it was simple moments of shared connection, casual chats over dinner, walks around the neighborhood, and a mutual love for books. But those small, innocent interactions began to take on a more intense tone. Jonathan found himself drawn to Emily in ways he never expected. She, in turn, began seeking his attention, eager to feel validated and special. This connection, however, started to cross lines. What once seemed like an innocent relationship began to evolve into something darker, something no one would expect in the safety of their small town. Jonathan and Emily began sharing secret moments, whispering to each other in corners, stealing touches in the quietest of moments. Both of them began to ignore the boundaries they had once respected. They knew what they were doing was wrong, yet it seemed to consume them in ways neither of them could escape. Jonathan's guilt began to grow, but so did his obsession with Emily. Emily, too, became entangled in the secrecy, feeling both confused and empowered by the attention she was receiving. As time went on, they made efforts to hide their growing connection from Marissa. Emily began to act distant around her mother, often retreating to her room or making excuses to leave the house. Jonathan, too, became more distant, often spending late nights at work or claiming to be out on business trips. The tension in the house was palpable. Marissa, ever the diligent mother, didn't notice at first, but small things began to add up. She felt the strain in her marriage and couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But it wasn't until she began to notice the strange glances exchanged between Jonathan and Emily that she started to question everything. The affair, carefully hidden in the shadows, had already begun to take hold, and the consequences of their actions were growing closer by the day. Things took a sharp turn when Marissa, Jonathan's wife, noticed strange changes in her husband's behavior. He had always been a loving and attentive partner, but over the past few months, something had shifted. He was distant, often late coming home from work, and there was a subtle coldness in the air whenever he was around. Marissa couldn't pinpoint the exact moment everything began to change, but she could feel the tension growing between them. He no longer looked at her the way he used to, and their once close conversations had become sparse and strained. She couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he wasn't telling her. It wasn't just his behavior that troubled her. The dynamics at home had also shifted. Emily, her daughter, was becoming increasingly withdrawn. Gone were the days of lively dinners and family outings. Now, Emily spent most of her time locked in her room, barely speaking to anyone. When she did emerge, her demeanor was far colder than before. Marissa tried to talk to her, but her efforts were met with excuses and hurried dismissals. Something was definitely wrong, but what exactly? Marissa had no idea. One evening, after another night of Jonathan coming home late, Marissa decided to take matters into her own hands. Her suspicions had reached a boiling point, and she could no longer ignore the gnawing feeling in her stomach. She took Jonathan's phone while he was in the shower, hoping to find something that would give her clarity. What she discovered was nothing short of a nightmare. The phone was filled with messages from Emily. At first, Marissa tried to tell herself it was nothing, that maybe she was overreacting. But as she scrolled through the texts, the truth became impossible to deny. The messages were intimate, bordering on inappropriate. There was talk of longing looks, stolen moments, and quiet confessions that felt far too personal. As Marissa read on, her heart pounded in her chest, and her hands trembled with shock. She could feel the ground beneath her slipping away. The last few messages were especially damning. Emily had written, "I can't stop thinking about you," followed by "I love you" and then a kiss emoji. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she was seeing. The betrayal, the deceit, it was all too much. With shaking hands, Marissa put the phone down and sat frozen, her thoughts whirling. She had always trusted Jonathan, but now everything felt like a lie. The person she had married, the father of her daughter, had crossed an unforgivable line. She didn't know what to do next, but one thing was certain: this secret couldn't be allowed to continue. The life they had built was now shattered, and the truth, no matter how painful, had to come out. The night after Marissa confronted Jonathan, something unimaginable happened. The small, quiet town awoke to the shocking news that Jonathan Stevens had been found dead in his study. His lifeless body lay sprawled across the desk, and there were signs of a violent struggle. At first, no one knew what to make of it. Was it a burglary gone wrong? Or something more sinister? The news spread like wildfire, and the normally peaceful town was immediately gripped by fear and curiosity. Marissa was the first to find him, though she had no idea what she would walk into when she entered the study that evening. The sight of Jonathan's body, his face twisted in pain, would haunt her forever. She screamed, her voice raw and desperate, but there was no one to hear. As the authorities were called and the investigation began, the town was left in shock. Everyone wondered who could have committed such a brutal act. The questions began to pile up. Was it a random attack? Or had someone close to Jonathan been involved? The police quickly zeroed in on Marissa. As his wife, she was the most likely suspect. She had discovered the affair, and in the eyes of many, she had the motive to kill. But Marissa's grief and shock were undeniable, and she swore to the investigators that she had no part in Jonathan's death. She was devastated, her mind consumed by the unimaginable thought that her husband was gone and that she was left with the knowledge of his betrayal. Yet, as the days passed, something didn't sit right with the police. The more they delved into the family's background, the more inconsistencies they found. Marissa had her secrets, yes, but there was something else lingering beneath the surface. The investigation took an unexpected turn when Emily went missing. Just a day after Jonathan's death, she had vanished without a trace. The police were baffled. Had she run away in fear, or had something more sinister happened? Marissa insisted that Emily had nothing to do with Jonathan's death, but the fact that she was now gone raised troubling questions. Was Emily trying to escape the consequences of the affair, or was there more to her disappearance? With Emily nowhere to be found, the small town was plunged into a state of uncertainty. As the police searched for her, they continued to look at every possible angle. The affair between Jonathan and Emily had been discovered, and now the question remained: who was responsible for Jonathan's death? Marissa, who had once seemed so ordinary, now stood at the center of a horrific mystery. The town held its breath, waiting for answers that might never come. The truth seemed more elusive with each passing day. As the investigation continued, new evidence came to light that turned everything on its head. It was soon discovered that Emily hadn't disappeared at all. She had been hiding in plain sight. The small town that had once been so tightly knit now felt like a web of deceit and uncertainty. Emily had been in contact with Jonathan's closest friend, a man named Mark, who had known the family for years. He had been helping Emily escape from the consequences of her actions. What had initially seemed like a simple disappearance was now unraveling into something much more complicated. Mark, who had been like an uncle to Emily, had been a silent accomplice in the affair. He had known about the illicit relationship between Jonathan and Emily, and rather than reporting it or confronting Jonathan, he had chosen to protect her. When Jonathan's death occurred, Mark's involvement took a darker turn. He helped Emily stage her disappearance, making it appear as though she had been abducted. He convinced her that running away was her only option, that she needed to distance herself from the chaos of Jonathan's murder. But the police were getting closer to the truth. As they dug deeper, they found evidence that tied Mark to both Jonathan's death and Emily's disappearance. Mark's phone records revealed that he had been in constant contact with Emily after Jonathan's death, coaching her on how to stay hidden. The police also found security footage that showed Mark leaving his house the night Jonathan was killed, hours after the murder took place. His alibi began to crumble, and he was quickly brought in for questioning. Under pressure, Mark finally confessed to his involvement in the cover-up. He explained that he had been blinded by his loyalty to Emily, wanting to protect her from the consequences of the affair. But as the truth emerged, it became clear that his actions had only made things worse. Mark had helped Emily avoid capture, but in doing so, he had prolonged the investigation and kept the town in a state of fear. The community was now grappling with the realization that someone they had trusted had been hiding a deep secret for years. As the police continued to piece together the puzzle, it became evident that Emily's motivations were more complex than anyone had anticipated. She hadn't just run away to escape the consequences of the affair. She had been driven by guilt, fear, and manipulation. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, and it was unclear who was truly to blame for the tragic events that had unfolded. What was certain, however, was that the Stevens family's secrets had torn apart not only their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. The truth had finally come to light, but the damage had already been done. As the truth finally emerged, the town was left in a state of disbelief. Emily, who had been hiding in plain sight for weeks, was arrested for her role in Jonathan's death. The once innocent girl, who had been so beloved by her community, was now at the center of a shocking crime. The investigation had revealed the twisted series of events that led to Jonathan's murder, and Emily's involvement was undeniable. The town, which had once been so peaceful, was now left to grapple with the horrifying reality that a daughter had killed her stepfather. Marissa, devastated by the loss of her husband, was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had always trusted Jonathan, believed in the life they had built together, but now everything was shattered. She felt betrayed not only by him but by her daughter as well. The affair, the murder, it was too much to bear. Marissa had been thrust into a nightmare she never could have imagined, and she wasn't sure how to move forward. The town, too, was forever changed. People who had known Jonathan for years couldn't reconcile the man they had admired with the actions he had taken in secret. The once friendly neighborhood had turned cold, as people whispered behind closed doors and tried to make sense of the events that had unfolded. Friends, family, and neighbors were all left questioning how something so terrible could happen in a town like theirs. Everyone had been touched by the tragedy in some way, and no one knew who to trust anymore. As Emily faced the consequences of her actions, the town continued to try to rebuild, though things would never be the same. The trial was a long and painful process, with Emily's guilt hanging heavy in the air. Her defense team argued that she had been manipulated and coerced, but the evidence was overwhelming. In the end, Emily was found guilty of manslaughter, though the case was far from simple. The courtroom was filled with tears as Marissa watched her daughter, once so innocent, stand trial for something that had torn their lives apart. The aftermath of the murder was felt for years. Marissa tried to find a way to heal, but the weight of the betrayal and the loss of both her husband and her daughter was too much. Emily, now a convicted criminal, was left to face the consequences of her actions in a prison cell. The town, forever scarred by the tragedy, tried to return to normal, but no one would ever forget the dark secret that had shattered their seemingly perfect world. In the end, the small town learned a painful lesson: not everything is as it seems, and secrets have a way of coming to light sometimes with deadly consequences. What had begun as a quiet family affair had destroyed everything in its path, leaving nothing but grief, confusion, and a community forever changed by the truth.